And at number 10, we unraveled the plot that was initially framed as a desperate plea for help, but was ultimately revealed as a cold-blooded execution. A bloody afternoon that pitted brotherly loyalty against cold, hard cash. Stay tuned, because the true ringleaders were not just a handful of students, but a phantom network operating in the shadows. Number 10. Lyle and Eric Menéndez. The Price of Freedom. The date, August 20th, 1989. The target, Jose and Kitty Menéndez. The conspirators, Lyle Menéndez, 21, and Eric Menéndez, 18. The location, Beverly Hills, California. The summer of 1989 in Beverly Hills was thick with the scent of affluence and the murmur of old money. The Menéndez family appeared to be the epitome of the American dream realized: success, wealth, influence, and two seemingly promising young sons, Lyle and Eric, groomed for Ivy League futures. Jose Menéndez was a high-powered executive in the entertainment industry, a self-made man who wielded absolute control over his domain. Kitty, his seemingly refined wife, presided over their opulent home. But beneath the terracotta roof and behind the manicured lawns, the air was not one of domestic bliss. It was suffocating, heavy with secrets and the corrosive acid of decades of unaddressed trauma. This was a house where silence was law and obedience was the price of survival. The facade was perfect, but the reality, as later testimony would reveal, was a private, terrifying nightmare. The brothers, Lyle, the elder, more aggressive and outwardly confident, and Eric, the introspective, tennis-playing younger sibling, had lived under a reign of control so absolute that they perceived only one escape route left available to them. They were not just sons, they were subjects in a tyranny ruled by a father whose ambition was matched only by his alleged capacity for cruelty, and a mother whose alleged complicity sealed their fate. Official reports from the ensuing investigation, later scrutinized by journalists and debated in the courtrooms, painted a picture of systematic psychological warfare. Jose Menéndez allegedly subjected his sons to relentless psychological pressure, fueled by narcissism and a pathological need for control, often tying their self-worth directly to athletic and academic performance. The whispers of sexual abuse, which would become the bedrock of their defense, were locked away behind the fortress walls of privilege and silence. The family's immersion in the elite world of Hollywood finance provided the perfect cover. Who would question the parents of two seemingly successful golden boys, especially when the family's image was paramount? Lyle later spoke of the terror of being unable to escape a parent who was both provider and predator, a classic conflict that ultimately drove the plot. The plot itself was not a spontaneous eruption of rage, but a chilling piece of logistical planning that defied the profile of impulsive fratricide. It was a systematic execution designed to look like an outside job, a professional hit meant to secure two things: freedom from their father and access to a fortune estimated to be in the tens of millions of dollars. This inherent duality, the act of desperate escape masked as a cold-blooded acquisition, is what kept the narrative perpetually unresolved for the public. The plan, as detailed later in the sensationalized trials, hinged on precision. August 20th, 1989. The location, the den of their lavish home. Lyle and Eric armed themselves with shotguns, weaponry supposedly purchased by Lyle, an act that demonstrated a terrifying capacity for foresight and premeditation. The brothers entered the den, confronted their parents, and opened fire. The sheer violence of the attack, the multiple savage shotgun blasts at close range, was intended to send a message that the assailants were professionals, ruthless and efficient. This was not the work of their own sons. The overkill in the shooting suggested a motive beyond simple robbery. It suggested an emotional, deeply personal act disguised by professional tools, a final, violent attempt to obliterate the source of their trauma. The immediate aftermath was an exercise in performance art. The brothers drove to the coast to dispose of the weapons, and then deliberately established a false alibi at a local cinema. Lyle then dialed 911, his voice a meticulously calibrated symphony of panic and distress. "Somebody killed my parents," he screamed, playing the role of the devastated survivor. The initial police response was consistent with their theory. This looked like organized crime retaliation, perhaps stemming from Jose's dealings in the often shady world of entertainment finance. For months, the brothers lived in the shadow of their act, spending lavishly, buying expensive cars, watches, and indulging in a lifestyle that seemed oddly unmarred by grief. This spending spree, far from an indicator of innocence, would become the first major red flag for investigators, painting a portrait of negativity bias in action, the public's immediate assumption that the sudden wealth was linked to the sudden death. The walls of secrecy, however, are rarely built strong enough to withstand the pressure of guilt. The true unraveling of the Menéndez narrative did not come from forensic evidence, although there was plenty, but from the very foundation of modern therapy. Eric, consumed by a guilt or fear that overwhelmed his sibling pact, sought counsel from a psychotherapist, Dr. L. Jerome Oziel. Here lies the crucial, almost impossible curiosity gap that kept the nation glued to the story. Dr. Oziel, allegedly seeking leverage, or perhaps validation for his own professional standing, began secretly taping his sessions with Eric. These tapes, filled with Eric's tearful confessions, the details of the abuse allegations, and the chilling recounting of the murders, became the gold standard of evidence that the prosecution would later fight tooth and nail to introduce. The ethical line Dr. Oziel walked between doctor, confidant, and potential informer became a major legal battleground. When Dr. Oziel's mistress eventually brought those recordings to the police, the illusion shattered. In March 1990, Lyle and Eric Menéndez were arrested. The subsequent trials were a masterclass in narrative warfare. The prosecution argued greed. They presented evidence of the massive life insurance policies, the spending, and the clear motive of escaping their father's control to access their fortune. Their argument was sharp. This was a premeditated double murder committed by two spoiled sons. But the defense, weaponized by the formidable Leslie Abramson, fought back with the narrative of cyclical trauma. The boys testified for over a month, detailing years of sexual abuse, emotional degradation, and constant threats of violence from Jose and Kitty's alleged complicity or willful blindness. They were not murderers. They were survivors pushed to the absolute brink. They claimed they pulled the trigger not for the money, but because they genuinely feared their father would kill them if they exposed the truth. The first set of trials ended in hung juries, a national stalemate that perfectly reflected the country's own inability to reconcile the two narratives, the privileged sons versus the abused children. The transformation in the retrial, commencing in 1995 under a more restrictive judge who limited the scope of the abuse testimony, led to a different verdict. In March 1996, both brothers were convicted of 2 counts of murder and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Yet the story is defined by its refusal to die. In the modern era, the narrative has shifted again, fueled by new documentaries and greater understanding of childhood trauma. The Menéndez saga is a profound study in the ambiguity of justice. Did 2 young men commit an atrocious, calculating double murder for money? Or did they snap under an intolerable regime of terror and abuse? The question keeps the loop perpetually open, reminding us that the domestic sphere can be the most dangerous war zone of all. The Menéndez brothers successfully broke free from their father's control, but at the ultimate cost. Their struggle in the courtroom revealed a deep societal wound, the inability to see past privilege to recognize true domestic horror. But this kind of hidden tyranny, where power abusers hide in plain sight, is not unique to Hollywood mansions. Our next case explores a suburban home in California, where the secret wasn't sexual abuse, but a slow, systematic starvation of the soul, involving 13 children held captive for years. The escape itself was a miracle, a single, desperate phone call in the dead of night. Where in the world are you watching this from? Let us know in the comments. Then stay with us as we uncover the nightmare of the Turpin family, a suburban prison built on deprivation and systematic neglect. The sheer duration of their confinement tests the very limits of human endurance. Number 9. David and Louise Turpin, The House of Horrors Captivity. The date: escape and rescue on January 14, 2018. Abuse spanned years, beginning in Texas and escalating in California. The target: their 13 biological and adopted children. The conspirators: David Turpin and Louise Turpin, the parents. The location: Paris, Riverside County, California. The story of the Turpin family is not one of a quick, violent explosion like the Menéndez case, but a slow-burn horror. It is a narrative built upon the gradual, calculated erosion of identity, a sustained campaign of deprivation waged by two people against their own offspring. This case bypassed the sensational headlines of wealth and focused instead on the primal shock of systemic torture and institutional failure. It was a domestic terror that lasted not for a day, but for decades, hidden in plain sight by the very structure of their lives, a structure engineered for absolute secrecy. David and Louise Turpin presented an image of a large, perhaps eccentric, but functional family unit. They moved across the country, from Texas to California, always seemingly chasing a new start, yet always carrying the same invisible cage with them. Neighbors in Paris would later describe the children as ghosts, silent, pale, moving in a strange, unnatural skip rather than a walk. They were children whose very instinct for self-preservation had been warped by a relentless, crushing discipline. This immediately sets up our first psychological angle, the institutional failure critique. How could so many adults, school officials, neighbors, social workers across multiple states fail to see what was unfolding inside that seemingly ordinary suburban box? The Turpins successfully employed authority bias by legally registering their home as a private school, diverting standard public scrutiny. The abuse began subtly, but escalated ruthlessly. In their Texas years, the parents began the pattern: isolation from the outside world, homeschooling designed to eliminate external scrutiny, and controlling the food supply. When the family moved into their California home, the mechanism of terror was fully engaged. The children, ranging in age from just 2 to 29 years old, were subjected to a regime that investigators later labeled torture. The details unearthed by law enforcement were almost beyond comprehension, forming the core conflict that drove the investigation. The abuse was systematic. The parents restricted food to such a degree that the older children sometimes had to scavenge for sustenance. One daughter recounted surviving on ketchup and mustard packets when left alone, a stark contrast to the presumed comfort of their suburban setting. The children were routinely chained to their beds, sometimes for days or weeks at a time, under the pretext of punishment for minor infractions, drinking water past a certain time, or even just making too much noise.
The home environment was toxic, described as perpetually foul-smelling, filled with the evidence of human waste because showers were rationed to once per year. This level of sustained, premeditated cruelty transforms the parents from mere abusers into domestic wardens, meticulously controlling every biological need of their captives. The children were also kept on a nocturnal schedule, sleeping during the day and awake at night, further minimizing interaction with the outside world. The crucial open loop in this family's story, however, isn't the abuse itself, which became horrifically clear upon rescue, but the nature of the escape. It was not a coordinated breakout. It was an 11th-hour, terrified gamble taken by the eldest captive, Jordan Turpin. As David and Louise prepared for another move, this time to Oklahoma, Jordan overheard her mother threatening the children with permanent chaining in the new location. This final, direct threat against her future freedom acted as the necessary catalyst. She realized that if they moved again, they would never leave. This moment represents the ultimate transformation, the paralyzed victim finding the will to act. On the morning of January 14, 2018, Jordan staged her move. She used a window to escape the house. She ran not to a trusted neighbor, but to a cell phone she had managed to acquire and hide. She called 911, her voice shaking with an urgency that cut through the dispatcher's professional calm. The immediate police response was swift, but the shock was palpable. Officers arriving at the Paris home found a scene described by the press as the House of Horrors. 3 children were found chained to their beds in the darkened rooms. The discovery immediately triggered national outrage, not just at the parents, but at the system. Reports later surfaced about prior contacts, about neighbors who heard strange noises, and the sheer scale of the neglected children. This opened a massive secondary investigation into Riverside County Social Services, suggesting a systemic failure of oversight that allowed this prolonged act of psychological and physical terrorism to continue unchecked. When David and Louise Turpin were apprehended, their initial defense was incoherent, rooted in a shared delusion that justified their actions as necessary discipline. This attempt to reframe torture as parental authority failed utterly under the weight of the physical evidence and the children's testimony. The legal fallout was swift. David and Louise Turpin faced numerous felony counts. The eventual legal outcome, a guilty plea from both parents to 13 counts of torture and 13 counts of false imprisonment, avoided a full trial but still spelled out a life sentence, 25 years to life in state prison for each parent. The aftermath for the children was dramatic, yet fraught with new challenges. They suffered from severe malnutrition, cognitive delays, and an inability to trust basic human interaction. Millions of dollars were donated to a trust fund for their care, but this too became a point of conflict as court-appointed guardians wrestled with managing the funds, leading to further investigations into their welfare. The legacy of the Turpin case is a dual trauma: the physical horror inflicted by the parents and the institutional trauma of a system that let them continue their reign of terror for so long. The Turpin nightmare ended with a single phone call, a desperate plea for sunlight and food. But sometimes the escape is not an individual choice. Sometimes the entire family unit is wiped out by the one person who should have protected them the most. Our next case was almost silent, a dark secret buried in medical records spanning over a decade. This story involves a mother who specialized in undetectable murder. The slow, quiet suffocation of the unseen victim is a horror unlike any other. Next, we look at the chilling 10-year-long reign of Marybeth Tinning, the suspected serial infant killer whose quiet composure masked a truly staggering body count. Number 8. Marybeth Tinning, the slow suffocation of innocence. The date. Repeated child deaths spanning 1972 to 1985. Tammy Lynn's death on December 20th, 1985. The target, her own 9 children. The conspirator, Marybeth Tinning, the mother. The location, Duanesburg and Schenectady County, New York, USA. The story of Marybeth Tinning defies the typical true crime structure. It is not defined by a sudden explosion of violence or a dramatic public confrontation. Instead, it is a study of institutional failure and the insidious power of a seemingly unremarkable life masking a monstrous reality. This narrative unfolds over 14 years, one tiny death at a time, a protracted exercise in manipulation that preys on the medical community's faith in diagnosis. Tinning's methods were stealthy, her performance of grief award-worthy, and her ability to evade suspicion for so long is a damning indictment of professional complacency. The very language of medicine, SIDS, became the ultimate authority bias camouflage, a label that discouraged further intrusive investigation into the grieving parents. The psychological foundation of Tinning's actions is rooted in a profound, deeply internalized sense of worthlessness, hinted at by her own troubled childhood. She
confided that she felt unwanted, an accidental child. This deep-seated need for control and attention manifested as the ultimate, perverse form of maternal bonding, killing the child only to resurrect herself as the tragic, heroic mother constantly battling sickness and fate. The conflict was internal, a battle for significance waged against her own children. Each death brought her a wave of attention, sympathy, and support from the community, a pattern she subconsciously replicated. Her control extended to her husband. She later admitted to poisoning him with barbiturates in 1974 during marital turmoil, signaling that her murderous intent was not solely focused on her children. The pattern began in 1967. The deaths were spaced out, giving the illusion that tragedy simply followed the family around. Yet an underlying thread of suspicion, largely ignored, began to form. When the adopted son, Michael, died in 1981, a child not sharing her genetics, the pattern became statistically impossible to ignore, even for the most complacent local authorities. The natural selection explanation finally broke down. This lack of immediate, official alarm speaks volumes about the pervasive negativity bias that shields quiet suburban mothers from suspicion, no matter how high the death toll. The crucial turning point, the moment the transformation from grieving mother to suspected serial killer began, arrived with the death of her 9th child, 4-month-old Tammy Lynn, on December 20th, 1985. This time, the authorities, likely facing immense community pressure or guided by a new, sharper medical examiner, ordered an autopsy that went beyond standard procedure. The medical examiner suspected asphyxiation, the quiet, untraceable smothering that left no external marks. The technique was simple: smothering with a pillow or blanket, a method that leaves virtually no trace on an infant's body. The investigation zeroed in on the one constant, Marybeth. When confronted and faced with the possibility of a deeper medical inquiry, she did not confess immediately, but her composure began to crack under forensic scrutiny. The key evidence emerged from laboratory tests that confirmed the cause of death in several cases pointed towards suffocation, not natural disease. She reportedly confessed to 3 of the 9 killings under interrogation, claiming an overwhelming compulsion, a level of psychological break that attempted to mitigate her responsibility. The subsequent trial focused on Tammy Lynn's death.
The defense, knowing the overwhelming circumstantial evidence, attempted to lean on her history of psychological issues and her claims of an abusive father. But the core conflict was clear: the loving caretaker versus the calculated killer. Prosecutors successfully argued that she needed the attention and the sympathy that came with being a mother beset by tragedy. In July 1987, Marybeth Tinning was convicted of second-degree murder for the death of Tammy Lynn. Her sentence was 20 years to life in prison. The jury acknowledged the crime was one of compulsion, but could not ignore the ultimate betrayal of the victim's vulnerability. The fallout was a wave of horrifying reinvestigation. The public realization that they had been living next door to a serial killer who specialized in the most helpless victims was staggering. Her life in prison became its own dark chapter, punctuated by parole denials, where the board explicitly cited the profound violation of trust, ensuring her narrative remains one of ultimate domestic betrayal. The Tinning case forces us to confront the immense danger when a person with deep-seated psychological voids gains control over the most vulnerable lives. Her method was stealth, her motive a desperate, murderous need for significance. Marybeth Tinning was denied freedom because she destroyed the very definition of motherhood through a quiet, methodical campaign. But not all acts of familial destruction are so quiet.
Our next subject also sought to destroy his family, though his method was far louder, far more shocking, and instantly immortalized in horror cinema. He didn't use a pillow. He used a high-powered rifle in the dead of night. Next, we confront the chilling echoes of a house where 6 members of a family were executed in their beds, a crime so deeply disturbing it inspired an entire franchise. The question is, what strange, powerful force was said to have driven him? The answer involves family rage, rumored mafia ties, and a confession that changed every time he told it. Number 7. Ronald DeFeo Jr., The Amityville Echoes. The date, November 13th, 1974. The target, his parents, Ronald and Louise, and 4 siblings, Dawn, Allison, Mark, John. The conspirator, Ronald Joseph DeFeo Jr., known as Butch. The location, 112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville, Long Island, New York. The address 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York carries a weight in the American psyche that few other crime scenes can match. It is a location forever synonymous with sudden, brutal familicide and the subsequent haunting presence of the paranormal. The crime committed here was the outright extermination of an entire nuclear unit in a single night, a level of devastation achieved not by a secret society, but by one troubled son, Ronald DeFeo Jr., or Butch. This event was an absolute rupture in the fabric of domestic life, creating a legend that transcended simple homicide. The official story, pieced together by investigators from DeFeo's own shifting accounts, is that in the pre-dawn hours of November 13, 1974, armed with a .35 caliber Marlin rifle, DeFeo Jr. systematically executed his entire family as they slept. The victims were found lying face down in their beds, suggesting they were entirely unaware of the danger. The parents were each shot twice. The 4 siblings, aged 9 to 18, received single fatal shots. This lack of struggle suggests a terrifying level of premeditation and the use of an almost machine-like detachment. The lack of struggle among 6 victims, a detail widely disseminated by the authorities, fueled decades of curiosity gap regarding the possibility of sedatives, a claim DeFeo later made but was never definitively proven. The core conflict of the DeFeo narrative, the one that birthed the horror movie empire, is the motive. DeFeo himself offered a series of dramatically different explanations. Initially, he blamed a shadowy figure, a mob hitman, claiming he was covering for them. A story partially plausible given his father's rumored mafia ties.
But later, he introduced the chilling defense that voices from the house, demonic or psychic entities, commanded him to kill. He claimed the voices made him do it, turning him into an unwilling, possessed instrument of terror. This psychological transformation from a son into an instrument of evil became the narrative that sold millions of books and movie tickets. The legal proceedings were turbulent. Despite the insanity defense, the jury found him guilty on 6 counts of second-degree murder. The judge, unable to reconcile the sheer brutality with a simple, rational motive, sentenced DeFeo Jr. to 6 concurrent sentences of 25 to life. The immediate aftermath was defined by the psychological fallout on the community. The subsequent family that moved into the infamous house fled after just 28 days, reporting a litany of terrifying phenomena. This account, heavily sensationalized, cemented the DeFeo case in pop culture folklore. This reliance on the Lutz's narrative demonstrated a powerful authority bias toward the supernatural, which was far easier to accept than the idea of a simple, purely human evil of this magnitude. The investigation itself was plagued by DeFeo's constant shifting narrative. In later appeals and interviews, he attempted to shift the blame to his sister, Dawn, claiming she killed the parents and siblings, and he only killed her accidentally. This ongoing struggle to rewrite his own history from behind bars kept the open loop of the Amityville mystery active for decades. The fallout was not just the loss of 6 lives, but the creation of a mythology where the simple earthly tragedy of family dysfunction was overshadowed by the terrifying possibility of demonic possession. The DeFeo family was annihilated by a single rifle shot. Their story became a chilling fable, blurring the lines between documented fact and Hollywood fiction. But sometimes the conspiracy to destroy a family is not about one house, but about erasing a whole life. Our next story involves a Christian ministry security chief whose desire for a new life and a new woman led to him orchestrating the brutal murder of his wife and 2 sons. This plot was hidden not under a house, but behind the veneer of religious devotion. Next, we expose the chilling hypocrisy of Chris Coleman, the man who killed for a mistress while serving a gospel organization.
Number 6. Chris Coleman, murdered to protect a gospel facade. The date, May 5, 2009. The target, his wife, Sabrina Coleman, and their 2 sons, Garrick, 11, and Nathan, 9. The conspirator, Chris Coleman. The location, Columbia, Illinois, USA. The conviction of Chris Coleman is a searing indictment of authority bias in the context of faith-based organizations. Coleman presented himself as a pillar of the Christian community, serving as the director of security for the massive international ministry led by televangelist Joyce Meyer. His life was a carefully curated performance of piety, responsibility, and moral uprightness. The betrayal, therefore, was not just against his wife and children, but against the entire community that looked up to him as a spiritual guardian. His facade was the ultimate weapon, ensuring no one would look too closely at his home life. The crime itself was designed to look like a random, horrifying intrusion. On May 5, 2009, Coleman claimed that an intruder broke into their home and murdered his wife Sabrina and strangled his 2 sons, Garrick and Nathan. He claimed he was away at work at the time. This initial claim was a calculated effort to direct police attention away from the inner circle, reinforcing his role as the victimized security expert. But the conflict emerged almost immediately in the investigation's physical evidence and Coleman's composure. Investigators from the Illinois State Police found the scene staged, yet lacking the expected signs of a true, desperate struggle. Furthermore, Coleman's behavior was noted by law enforcement as disturbingly detached and self-centered in the immediate aftermath, signaling the beginning of the transformation from victim to suspect. The true engine of this tragedy was not a random home invader, but a classic motive cloaked in religious hypocrisy: murder to facilitate a new life. Detectives soon uncovered Chris Coleman's obsessive, secret relationship with a woman named Sherry Harris. The desire to be with his mistress, coupled with the desire to avoid the financial and spiritual fallout of a divorce within a high-profile ministry environment, created an overwhelming impetus for elimination. Coleman's public persona as a moral authority provided the perfect negativity bias shield. It was simply unthinkable that a man in his position could be capable of such calculated evil. The transformation from grieving husband to prime suspect was swift, driven by digital footprints. Investigators traced communications, uncovering evidence of his affair and his increasing desperation to leave his marriage without professional ruin. The timeline of his movements was scrutinized, revealing holes in his alibi that suggested opportunity and meticulous planning. Prosecutors alleged that he had orchestrated the entire scene, including graffiti spray-painted on the walls to look like threats from an outside enemy, further utilizing his security background to mask his actions. The trial became a battle between two narratives. The prosecution hammered home the infidelity, the financial motivation, and the calculated staging of the crime scene. They presented evidence showing the strangulation of the boys was particularly brutal and personal, inconsistent with a hurried intruder. The defense attempted to introduce reasonable doubt, but the weight of the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. In 2011, the jury returned its verdict: guilty. Chris Coleman was convicted of the first-degree murders of Sabrina, Garrick, and Nathan. The sentence was life in prison without the possibility of parole. The fallout was a profound crisis of faith and trust within the ministry community and beyond. A man entrusted with security had become the ultimate domestic threat. This case served as a stark lesson on authority bias. When respect for an individual's public image supersedes critical, objective examination of their private life, absolute evil can take root and flourish. Chris Coleman's mask fell away, revealing the rot beneath his spiritual attire. But not all betrayals are for a new lover. Sometimes the betrayal is to erase a living testament to a past failure, a child deemed inconvenient to a future narrative. Our next story involves a father who poisoned his own son on Halloween, not for spiritual freedom, but for mere insurance money. This crime terrified parents nationwide and forced a permanent change in a beloved holiday. Next, we expose the chilling history of Ronald Clark O'Brien, the Candyman.
Number 5. Ronald Clark O'Brien, the Halloween Poisoner. The date: October 31, 1974. Poisoning. Execution: 1984. The target: his 8-year-old son, Timothy O'Brien. The conspirator: Ronald Clark O'Brien, the father. The location: Deer Park near Houston, Texas. The story of Ronald Clark O'Brien, universally known as the Candyman, is a chilling narrative about the transformation of a national celebration into a scene of calculated patricide. This case relies heavily on negativity bias, the public's immediate, visceral fear of random, targeted violence against children, and weaponizes it as a cover for simple, cold-blooded financial motive. O'Brien's crime was not about passion or long-term confinement. It was a short, sharp transaction to erase a debt. On Halloween night 1974, the streets of Deer Park, Texas, were filled with the excited chaos of trick-or-treating. Ronald O'Brien, an optician by trade, participated in the tradition with his 2 children, Timothy, 8, and Elizabeth, 5. He handed out candy, but he also distributed death. The weapon was not a gun or a knife, but potassium cyanide, a colorless, odorless, and virtually untraceable poison. The delivery system? The beloved powdery pixie sticks. O'Brien allegedly laced Timothy's pixie sticks with a lethal dose. The goal, according to prosecutors, was clear: to collect a substantial life insurance payout on his son. O'Brien was drowning in financial troubles, reportedly over $100,000 in debt. The conflict here is the ultimate commodification of human life, valuing his son's life at a fixed monetary sum, then executing the transaction. Timothy, upon returning home, complained that the candy tasted bitter. His father reportedly helped him open the straw packaging. Moments later, the boy began convulsing, vomiting violently, and dying in his father's arms. Ronald O'Brien played the role of the helpless father, rushing his son to the hospital. The initial wave of panic was directed externally. The authorities and the community assumed a random maniac was targeting children. This was the primary authority bias that O'Brien initially exploited. This assumption allowed O'Brien a small window of time to escalate his plot. In a move that demonstrated a terrifying lack of remorse, O'Brien distributed other poisoned candies to at least 4 other children in the neighborhood. This secondary act was designed to solidify the random killer narrative, spreading the crime across a wider canvas to obscure his involvement with Timothy. However, investigators, quickly focusing on the person who claimed to have received the poisoned candy from a mystery house, found inconsistencies in O'Brien's story. The crucial break came when detectives learned O'Brien had recently made inquiries about purchasing cyanide. A chemical supply salesman confirmed O'Brien had asked about purchasing the poison shortly before Halloween. The focus shifted immediately from the mysterious stranger to the man who had everything to gain. The trial, which began in 1975, was intense. The prosecution presented the insurance policies, the suspicious inquiries, and the fact that he was the only source of the poisoned candies. The defense attempted to sow reasonable doubt, but the fact that he poisoned his own child to cover the trail of the first murder proved too much. In just 46 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Ronald O'Brien guilty of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection. The transformation of Halloween in America began immediately. The specter of the Candyman loomed large, causing parents nationwide to adopt new rituals, checking every piece of candy, banning homemade treats, and fostering a new level of suspicion towards the communal spirit of the holiday. This crime didn't just kill one boy, it poisoned the joy of an entire national tradition. O'Brien's execution, carried out by lethal injection in March 1984, was a grim public conclusion to a story rooted in financial desperation turned monstrous. He died insisting on his innocence, a final act of denial that remains a testament to his profound lack of remorse. The O'Brien case, rooted in the most mundane of motives, money, demonstrates that the deepest evil can wear the friendliest mask. But sometimes the betrayal is not for money, but for something far more volatile: control over one's own sexual and marital fate. Our next case involves a shocking, violent act of self-liberation, a crime that exploded onto the national stage, forcing America to confront its uncomfortable realities regarding domestic abuse and victimhood. Next, we examine the most unforgettable and controversial attack in modern marital history, the case of Lorena Bobbitt. If you were shocked by the Candyman, wait until you see how one woman fought back against years of silent terror. Number 4. Hart family murders, the cliffside facade collapse. The date, March 26, 2018. The target, 6 adopted children, Sierra, Marcus, Abigail, Devonte, Hannah, Jeremiah, and themselves. The conspirators, Jennifer and Sarah Hart, the adoptive mothers. The location, Coastal Highway 1, Mendocino County, California. Driving off a cliff. The Hart family murders is a story of lethal hypocrisy, a domestic tragedy that unfolded in the public eye through a lens of curated perfection, only to culminate in an act of absolute destruction. Jennifer and Sarah Hart presented themselves as the ideal modern progressive family, 2 white lesbian mothers dedicated to social justice, raising 6 adopted black children, whom they affectionately called the Hart Tribe. Their social media feed was a constant stream of activism, hugs, and festival attendance, generating massive authority bias and public admiration. But behind this vibrant digital facade, a far darker reality was festering. The abuse began years before the final catastrophe, following a pattern common to many severe domestic cases: isolation and deprivation. In Minnesota and Oregon, teachers, friends, and neighbors noticed red flags. One child arrived at school with bruises. Another was observed digging through garbage. The authority of social services was engaged multiple times, starting as early as 2008. Sarah Hart even pleaded guilty to misdemeanor domestic assault in 2011 for abusing one of the children. However, each time the authorities investigated, the Harts employed a strategy of deflection and relocation. They pulled the children out of public school to homeschool them, isolating them further and cutting off the primary source of mandated reporting. The local agencies, often overwhelmed, failed to intervene decisively, dismissing the complaints as minor or the Harts' explanations as reasonable. This pattern of moving and withdrawing successfully leveraged the negativity bias against child welfare agencies. They feared wrongly separating a large, seemingly loving family. The fatal transformation began in March 2018. A neighbor in Washington state, concerned that the children were being starved, called Child Protective Services, or CPS. The neighbor, sensing imminent danger, filed a formal complaint. CPS attempted a visit on Friday, March 23rd. No one answered. The Harts, aware that the wall was finally crumbling, made a chilling, definitive decision. They didn't flee to another state. They chose oblivion. On March 26, 2018, Jennifer Hart, with Sarah in the passenger seat and all 6 children, aged 12 to 19, secured inside, drove their GMC Yukon off a secluded 100-foot cliff on California's scenic Coastal Highway 1. The crash
has not accidental. Forensic data recovered from the SUV's engine computer was conclusive. The vehicle had stopped at the cliff edge, then accelerated rapidly to 20 miles per hour with the throttle at 100%, plunging into the Pacific below. Toxicology reports later indicated that both Sarah and two of the children had high levels of diphenhydramine, an allergy and sedative drug, in their systems, a terrifying suggestion of premeditation and drugging. The fallout was immediate and total. The bodies of Jennifer, Sarah, and 3 children were found near the wreckage. 3 other children were found later, scattered by the ocean. The body of Devante, the child whose viral hug with a police officer had once symbolized the family's virtue, was never formally recovered, though he was declared dead. The coroner's jury unanimously ruled the deaths a murder-suicide. The beautiful, socially conscious family that America had adored was exposed as a prison of abuse run by 2 adults who preferred to destroy their children than face the consequences of their tyranny. The Hart family's end was a spectacular, horrifying tragedy, a final act designed to control the narrative by ending it entirely. But sometimes the domestic monster operates for far longer, hidden not by social media, but by the community itself, which refuses to believe the extent of the evil. Our next case involves a husband and wife who were partners in serial killing, running a literal house of horrors for decades. The discovery of their victims, including their own daughter, beneath their suburban garden, still chills Britain to the bone. Next, we uncover the full, awful scope of the Fred and Rose West saga. Number 3. Fred and Rose West, the House of Horrors in Gloucester, England. The date: murders occurred across a span from the late 1960s to 1987. Arrests were made in 1994. The target: a procession of young women, lodgers, and their own daughter. The conspirators: Fred West and Rose West, husband and wife. The location: 25 Cromwell Street, Gloucester, England. The names Fred and Rose West are synonymous in the United Kingdom with a darkness so absolute it fractured the national psyche. This is not a story about political plots or sudden familial snap. This is the terrifying reality of a serial killer couple who built a domestic life, a house of horrors, on a foundation of rape, torture, and murder that spanned nearly 2 decades. Their ordinariness, contrasted with the unspeakable acts committed within their suburban semi-detached home, represents one of history's most jarring examples of negativity bias, the desire for neighbors, police, and social services to believe that nice people like Fred and Rose couldn't possibly be capable of this. Fred West, a former builder, was the driving force, but Rose West was not a reluctant accomplice. She was an active participant, sharing in the planning, the torture, and the disposal of the remains. Their relationship was a twisted pact, a shared enthusiasm for violence that elevated their partnership into a unique category of criminal history. The scope of their operation was vast and deeply embedded in their community. They lured their victims, often young women attracted by job offers or lodgings, to 25 Cromwell Street. The pattern involved sexual sadism, murder, and then the systematic destruction of the evidence. The house became a literal charnel house, with multiple bodies interred in the garden, beneath floorboards, and even within sections of the concrete foundation. The ultimate familial betrayal came with the discovery of their own eldest biological daughter, Heather, who had also been murdered and buried by her parents. The sheer number of victims who disappeared from their orbit, particularly lodgers, spoke to a tragic systemic failure of local authority to connect the repeated red flags. The investigation began not through a sudden event, but through the lingering disappearance of Fred's first wife, and later the formal missing person report filed for their daughter, Heather, who had vanished in 1987. The trail eventually led authorities to Fred West, who was already known to police for prior lesser sex offenses. The key transformation came in 1994, when police executed a search warrant on the Cromwell Street house. They weren't looking for bodies initially, they were looking for evidence related to Heather. What they found, after investigators noted disturbed earth in the garden, was the first set of remains. The subsequent excavation became a grim, nationally televised event. Investigators uncovered the remains of at least 9 victims buried in the garden alone. This forensic effort confirmed systematic murder spanning 2 decades. Fred West was arrested in February 1994. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, he eventually confessed to the majority of the killings. However, his confession was self-serving, designed to deflect blame and often attempting to exaggerate Rose's role as the mastermind. Rose West, conversely, adopted a posture of complete denial throughout her interrogation and trial, claiming she was a victim of Fred's abuse. The prosecution successfully tore down this defense by presenting testimony that showed her active, willing participation in the torture and murder of multiple young women, including her own stepdaughter and daughter. At their trials, the prosecution meticulously laid out the timeline of degradation. Rose West was found guilty of 10 murders and sentenced to a life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. Fred West took his own life in his cell while awaiting trial, robbing the justice system of the final accounting, and deepening the curiosity gap surrounding the full scope of their crimes and any potential hidden victims. The fallout was a deep societal reckoning in Britain. It exposed the shocking failure of multiple agencies, social services, police, and the community itself to intervene despite numerous red flags. The sheer scale of evil, operating just meters from everyday life, forced a national conversation about the signs of hidden domestic terror. The Wests were brought down by their own buried secrets. But sometimes the conspiracy to destroy a family is not about decades of hidden torture, but about a sudden, desperate maneuver to realign one's life. Our next story involves a young mother whose desire for a new beginning led her to concoct a story of terror, setting off a massive national manhunt for a phantom killer. Next, we uncover the chilling reality of Susan Smith, the woman who wept for her missing sons while hiding the horrific truth. Number 2. Susan Smith, the lie that consumed a nation. The case of Susan Smith is a masterclass in negativity bias weaponized by the perpetrator. It is a narrative that fed on the media's hunger for innocence corrupted, utilizing the public's profound, almost instinctive trust in a mother's protective nature. The initial story was tailor-made for national sympathy. A young, single mother fighting to maintain her life, brutally victimized by an unknown assailant during a carjacking. This was theater of the highest, most tragic order. The timeline of supposed horror began in the twilight hours of October 25, 1994. Susan Smith claimed that while driving near a lake in Union, South Carolina, a masked black man forced his way into her car at gunpoint, ordered her out, and drove away with her 2 children strapped into their car seats. This narrative was designed to elicit maximum emotional response, the theft of innocence, the targeting of the vulnerable. For 9 days, Susan Smith performed for the cameras. She appeared on national TV, tearfully pleading for the return of David and Michael. Her performance was meticulous, drawing immediate, unwavering belief from the nation. Her story was so convincing that it triggered a massive, high-profile search operation. This was the authority bias at its peak. The media and the public defaulted to trusting the narrative presented by the sole witness, the mother herself.
Yet investigators quickly noticed fissures in the emotional performance that contrasted sharply with the desperate behavior of genuine victims. The details of the carjacking, the convenience of the location, the lack of struggle, and most critically, the nearly 1-hour delay before the 911 call did not align with the expected pattern of a person in acute shock. The conflict for investigators was simple. The physical evidence did not match the narrative. Slowly, police pressure and inconsistencies in her own timeline began to wear down the facade. The true motive investigators suspected was
her desire to escape the burden of motherhood to pursue a relationship with a man who did not want her children. The transformation in the narrative came on November 3, 1994. After nearly 10 days of relentless pressure, Susan Smith broke. She confessed. The truth she revealed was a devastating reversal of the national narrative. There was no carjacker. There was only Susan. She had driven her car, with David and Michael secured in their seats, to the John D. Long Lake. She stopped the car, and then, deliberately, pushed the vehicle into the water, watching it sink with her children trapped inside. This act of filicide by drowning was the horrific reality behind the tearful public plea. The fallout was a collective gut punch. The nation that had spent 9 days rallying around a grieving mother was forced to confront the depth of her deception. The negativity bias swung violently, the figure of pity became the ultimate figure of condemnation. The headlines shifted from, "Where are the boys?" to "Mother kills sons, fakes carjacking." The legal process was swift. In 1995, Smith was tried and convicted of 2 counts of murder. Her sentence was life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. The legal system acknowledged the calculated malice required to drown one's own children while simultaneously misleading an entire nation. The legacy of Susan Smith is a chilling reminder that the most dangerous secrets are often kept not by powerful, shadowy organizations, but by the people we are conditioned to trust implicitly. The illusion of the loving mother was shattered, leaving behind only the stark, ugly truth of filicide driven by desperate, selfish ambition. Susan Smith's story ended behind concrete walls, a public spectacle of guilt and regret. But the theme of betrayal is universal. Our final case involves a shocking act of self-liberation, a crime that exploded onto the national stage, forcing America to confront its uncomfortable realities regarding domestic abuse and victimhood. This final story is about one woman's violent strike back against a personal tyrant. Next, we examine the most unforgettable, and controversial, attack in modern marital history, the case of Lorena Bobbitt. Number 1. Lorena Bobbitt, Mutilation and the Meaning of Self-Defense. The date, June 23, 1993, the attack, trial concluded 1994. The target, John Wayne Bobbitt's penis. The conspirator, Lorena Bobbitt, then Gallo, the wife. The location, Manassas, Virginia, USA. The case of Lorena Bobbitt is unique in this countdown because the transformation of the narrative did not pivot on the guilt of the perpetrator. Lorena readily admitted to the act, but on the justification for it. This story was a cultural flashpoint, less a standard crime and more a societal Rorschach test, forcing the public and the legal system to rapidly re-evaluate long-held beliefs about marital sanctity, domestic violence, and what constitutes a justifiable, albeit extreme, act of self-defense. The facts are starkly simple, yet drenched in context. After years of marriage marked by severe, ongoing physical and sexual abuse at the hands of her husband, John Wayne Bobbitt, Lorena reached an undeniable breaking point. On June 23, 1993, following an alleged act of rape by her husband, John fell asleep. Lorena procured a kitchen knife, returned to the bedroom, and severed his penis. The aftermath was immediate, chaotic, and instantly sensationalized by the 24-hour news cycle, which couldn't resist the shocking, physical nature of the revenge. The central conflict was between 2 competing public interpretations of the event. On one side stood the prosecution, arguing for malicious wounding, treating the act as a brutal, premeditated assault on a sleeping man. On the other side, driven by a surging wave of feminist and domestic violence advocacy groups, stood the defense, temporary insanity rooted in a long history of battered woman syndrome. This advocacy instantly turned Lorena from a mere assailant into a symbol of every woman trapped in an abusive marriage, a classic case of negativity bias against the perpetrator balanced by authority bias toward abuse counselors. The trial was a circus, forcing uncomfortable national conversations about marital rape. The defense used the years of documented abuse, the beatings, the psychological degradation, as evidence that Lorena was living under a constant state of fear and psychological torment. Her defense rested on the testimony of experts who explained how chronic abuse leads to a dissociative or extreme reaction when the victim sees an opportunity for escape. The prosecution countered by focusing on the calculated nature of the act. She took the knife, she performed the act, she then drove away and threw the severed organ into a field. The search for the severed penis, retrieved by police, packed in ice, and successfully reattached in a marathon surgery, only added a layer of almost surreal absurdity to the legal drama. The jury returned a verdict that stunned observers, not guilty by reason of insanity. The jury accepted the argument that, at the moment of the attack, Lorena Bobbitt was suffering from a temporary psychological break brought on by years of relentless abuse. The fallout was immense. Lorena was committed to a state psychiatric facility for observation, but was released after 45 days. The case forced a national reckoning on spousal abuse laws and the definition of self-defense. Lorena Bobbitt, ultimately, accomplished a profound transformation. She went from an isolated immigrant wife to the defining symbol of the fight against domestic violence in the 1990s. The Bobbitt case closes our countdown with the ultimate act of survival, a desperate, violent strike back against a personal tyrant. It demonstrates that familial betrayal is often the final, explosive consequence of isolation and unchecked power within the smallest unit of society, the family. This entire countdown has been a journey through the darkest corners of human motivation. The lessons learned from these betrayals, the need to look past the facade, the duty to question authority, and the necessity of believing the victims, are the true legacies left behind. Please tell us in the comments section where you are watching from and subscribe to our channel for more true crime documentary.